You know, if there's one thing that I don't think I can get behind in any way, shape, or form, in any scenario, it's gotta be unwarranted self-hatred. A horrific, a horrible, a dumb concept that I cannot support in any way. I understand that a little bit of shame is necessary, especially in this day and age, when so much information can travel so quickly. Shame is a necessary component of life because it is what, in my opinion, keeps us humble. It keeps us sane to a degree. It keeps us modest. Without shame, we would probably very quickly devolve into a state similar to that of the modern-day orangutan, or the ape, or the monkey. Primitive primates that masturbate publicly and fling shit at each other for fun. No, shame is necessary, but unwarranted self-hatred, now that is a step way too far. That is over the line for me. You know, when I think about unwarranted self-hatred, there's one story that comes to mind very quickly. It's one that happened recently, back whenever I was at the factory, and there was this man. He was roughly a year younger than me. For those who don't know, I'm 20, that means he would be 19. And he exhibited a trait that seems all too common in my generation, much to my chagrin. That is one of hatred. Not only of themselves for being part of this great generation, but also hatred of the broader generation purely because it is the generation that it is. Allow me to explain. You see, we were standing there on the factory line. We were making the products that we had to make. I won't go into that. It's not important. He looks over and he decides to start striking up a conversation, and he says, "Oh boy, this future generation, I tell you, this current and future generation, their humor. Oh boy. I sure don't like it." I said, "Well, buddy, you're gonna need to offer a little bit of elaboration, my man. I just don't know what you're talking about. You're speaking in such vague and broad and unspecific terms." He sort of meandered around a bit. He sort of pussyfooted around the question, and eventually he offered me up an answer of thinking that Uganda Knuckles and Tide Pods, eating Tide Pods, was dumb and dangerous, and literally no other generation would find that funny. And I said, my man, you sure you don't want to offer up any more recent examples? I mean, come on, people stopped talking about this a couple of years ago. I remember people making jokes about that when I was 17. That was in 2017. It's been 4 years since then. I'm sure there's plenty of other dangerous and non-specific sorts of memes that could have been harmful to this more recent generation, but he couldn't seem to conjure up any of them, so I said, okay, I'll take this and run with it. I said, why do you think that is not funny? Going along, of course, with the idea that humor is to a degree subjective. Again, I found him meandering around. It seemed like he couldn't conjure up an answer no matter how hard he tried, at least immediately. Eventually, what he decided to settle on was because it would have been tragic if someone had taken it a little too far, eaten a Tide Pod, and fucking died. He looked at me dead in the eyes and said, You think that's really funny, don't you?" Stuttering, stumbling, and mumbling the entire time, struggling to find some answer that could sort of own the libs in my direction. Well, it's not really funny to me, but he said, well, what if someone had died? That would have been someone's son who had eaten a Tide Pod and then found themselves in an early grave. Some mother would have been going home knowing that she had outlived her son. Do you not understand how messed up that is? I said, well, I understand. It would be tragic, but I don't know those people. I probably wouldn't know those people, because no one in my family is that dumb to eat a fucking Tide Pod, or really eat any sort of product that was not meant for human consumption. You know, say what you will about my family, I'm certain that a lot of other people have. I've got a family of weirdos. I've got a family of downright savage rednecks, hillbillies, sort of at that convergence point in between Missouri and Kentucky and Tennessee. We've all found ourselves to be a little more primitive than many other clans might have. But I'm just saying, at least we know how to read, and at least we know how to read the packaging on certain items to know that whether or not they are food or not. I said, well, I understand where you're coming at it, but I don't know those people, and probably it would be a very funny headline. He said, you're awful. That's awful. How could you laugh at that? You're sick. You're disgusting. You are the scum of the earth. And I said, buddy, it's the same thing of like looking in the newspaper, checking the obituaries, and finding out that a famous pianist has had a piano fall on him. It's funny, because what are the chances that this would actually happen? He looked at me dead in the eyes and he said, no, that wouldn't be funny. That would just be ironic. As if irony was not itself, to some degree, a part of comedy. We had a little bit of a conversation about that. I won't get into it. It's not that important. I looked at him and I said, so really you think that drawing the line at death, that's where everything just stops being funny? He said, no, I've got a very dark sense of humor. Well, obviously not if this is where you draw the line. I mean, I can't remember who said it, but someone, one famous comedian, I believe it was, said, you don't get to laugh at something and then go, ooh, wagging their finger at the camera. If you're going to draw the line at the atrocity of someone dying before their time was up, maybe being goaded into that by trying to do something for clout on the internet, I don't think that you've got quite as dark a sense of humor as you might think you have. I looked at him and I said, okay, well, I can prove outright, right here, right now, that the circumstances of one death can definitely, undeniably contribute to a comedic factor surrounding it. He said, okay, prove it. I said, all right. Elvis died on the toilet. I stared him dead in the eyes. I said, Elvis died on the fucking shitter. The king of rock and roll sat on his throne, and then all the drugs in his stomach kicked in, and he fucking died halfway through what quite possibly could have been the largest log of his life. Elvis was on the shitter, and he died. I had not gotten a fourth of the way through that description of the death of Elvis Presley before the man had been over in his spot trying to work on his unit, chuckling to himself because of it. Right then and there, I started pointing at him and saying, there, you see, it is funny. It is funny if someone dies in a funny way. You can't deny it. So therefore, if someone had died because they ate a Tide Pod for a meme that did not even last a full year, if I'm recalling correctly, my memory is not what it used to be, but if someone had died in that manner, it would have been funny to a degree. We would have enjoyed it and laughed about it. We would have felt sorry for them. But we would have still understood that it was funny to a degree. And eventually, he just had to concede. He eventually conceded wholeheartedly and said, okay, I guess you're right. But the generation, Gen Z, their humor is dumb. And like the next generation's probably not going to be better. And I said, okay, well the next generation is 5 years old. There's still hope. And I said, I will take that as a victory. Because I made this man look a little bit dumber than he did whenever he came into work. And now herein at the end of the story, we come to the conclusion that made me want to make this video in the first place. Generation Z, my peers, my people, are afflicted by a plague brought upon us by the prior generations. This plague is, of course, generational self-hatred, which I would add is unwarranted. The people who force this onto us, who indoctrinate us into hating ourselves and everything that our generation produces, are, of course, primarily those who are in charge right now, the baby boomers. And the way that they enforce this, the way that they make us all hate everything that our generation does and everything that our generation produces, or at least they try to make us hate them because there are outliers who refuse to, the way that they do this is by using every bit of their influence, every bit of their power, their wealth, all the connections they've got in the media, in Hollywood, it doesn't matter, to just sit there and try to remind us all about the good old days, they claim. Oh, the good old days. Oh, you mean the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s? You look at someone who was born in these decades and you'll get them talking about it and you'll see their eyes light up and they'll sit there and they'll talk your whole ear off. They'll talk to you till the cows come home. They'll talk to you till it's midnight, 3 in the morning, doesn't matter. About how great things used to be and how shitty things are right now. I say bullshit. I say things were never really that good, and if they aren't good anymore, it's purely your fault. You can't blame me for the world being so shitty nowadays, because I just got here in the grand scheme of things. You've been here, what, 4 times as long as I have? You're 80 years old, I'm 20. Who here is more at fault for the way things are now? You look at these people who talk your ear off about the Beatles, the Stones, Bruce Springsteen, Mellencamp, all these figureheads of these prior generations that no one really gives a shit about anymore. They tell you about all the movies that they used to watch. They tell you about all these great grand events that happened. They tell you about how they used to have to walk 15 miles and barefoot in like freezing rain to school and try to make you feel grateful for having a minimum wage job you barely pay your bills with. They look at you and you tell you about this. They never look at any of the bad shit that happened in their generation because they're looking looking back on everything that happened with rose-tinted glasses, I think about some of the most tumultuous and turmoil-filled moments of my young life. I think back to around 2007, 8, 9, 10, and I won't go into the things that were happening there, but I was a kid, I barely understood these things, but they horrified me greatly. And nonetheless, I look back on those years with a great nostalgia, because it was when I first discovered YouTube and set to work trying to make little shitty videos where I was editing Pokemon sprites together, staying up late into the night on a school night trying to find something funny to look at. I look back on my middle school years when I was just some weird autismo who didn't know that he was autistic, getting made fun of for playing his fucking DS in the hallway. I nonetheless look back on those times with a great fondness, because things were so much simpler and I just didn't know as much shit, and ignorance is bliss. This is the mentality that you must understand these people employ. Truth is, things back then fucking sucked. Most places probably didn't even have air conditioning. If you were alive back then, chances are you would have been broke as shit. All I'm trying to say is, they've somehow found a way of making a cult of personality based around their generation, and you just gotta break through the conditioning. Next time some fucking 70-year-old man is talking your ear off about how kids these days just don't get it, or in my case, a kid who's around your own fucking age, just look at them dead in the eyes and tell them, no, you don't believe that. Give them your reasoning and respectfully disagree. These people disgust me immensely. So the too long didn't watch version of all this. Generational self-hatred is dumb as shit, and you shouldn't buy into it. Our generation is awesome, we're gonna kick ass, and no one can stop us, that's the thing. I've never been good at outros, I've been Keezer. If you enjoyed, click like, subscribe, do all that shit, get me to 1,000 so I can get some fucking pocket change on these videos. I'll see you next time.